Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to take a concept you probably think about every single day, money, and completely turn it on its head. This is a deep dive into where money and debt actually come from, and it challenges, well, just about every economic assumption we have. And here's the puzzle that really gets me. We all have this deep, almost gut feeling that you have to pay your debts. I feel like a fundamental moral rule. But why? Why does that feeling persist even when a debt is, obviously unjust?
Right.
Like, think about loans forced on a country by a dictator, or interest rates that mean you pay back the original amount 10 times over. The math doesn't make sense, the justice isn't there, but that feeling, it's still there.
That phrase, surely one has to pay one's debts, is so powerful. And the confusion comes from the story we're all told about what money is. The conventional story, the one that starts with barter, is, to be blunt, a myth.
It's a complete myth.
A complete myth.
Right.
Money isn't some neutral tool invented for convenience. It has always been a system of morality, politics, and power. And its history is deeply tied to violence.
Okay, that is a huge claim. So let's break it down. Today, we're going to dismantle that great myth of barter.
Then we'll trace how debt actually came before money.
And we'll look at how ancient civilizations dealt with debt crises in a way that would probably give modern bankers a heart attack. All right, so every time you open an economics textbook, the first chapter on money has the same little story.
Oh, yes. The double coincidence of wants.
Exactly. Henry has potatoes, but he needs shoes. Joshua has shoes, but he wants a haircut. Trade is impossible until someone invents money as this perfect intermediary. It's presented as just logical.
It's a very elegant fantasy, and economists love it because it makes the market seem like this natural, rational thing that just springs up from individuals trying to be efficient. But here's the thing that's so wild. Anthropologists have been pointing out for almost 100 years that this is just not true. No one has ever, anywhere, found a society where the normal way neighbors trade with each other is through barter.
Nobody, not one.
Not one. You just don't find places where people are saying, okay, I'll give you 20 chickens for that cow. It doesn't happen between people who live together who know each other.
So if it's not happening in villages, where does barter happen? Does it happen at all?
Well, it happens, but it happens almost exclusively between strangers or, even enemies. It's for situations where you'll probably never see the other person again, so there's no trust, no ongoing relationship.
Which means both people are just trying to get the best deal they can right now.
Precisely. And that's reflected in the language. The Old English phrase, truck and barter, and its equivalent in a lot of European languages, it literally meant to trick or to rip someone off.
Because there's no reputation to uphold. You can just take the goods and run.
You've got it. So the very foundation of the economic model is actually based on how you would treat an enemy, not a neighbor.
So, how did neighbors and friends handle things? If I needed a tool from you, what was the process?
It was all managed through credit, through IOUs, basically. The whole community functions on a web of who owes what to whom. It's less a transaction and more a social fabric.
Like a running tab.
A running tab, exactly. If you need something, you take it. The understanding is that when I need something, you'll be there for me. It's framed as a gift. We're just helping out because the relationship is what matters, not the specific value of the tool.
Okay, so this totally flips the script. If money didn't come from barter and all exchange was originally based on credit, then what actually is money?
Well, this is what's known as the credit theory.
Yeah.
And it argues that money is, first and foremost, just a unit of account. It's a way to measure debt.
A unit of account.
Yeah, a yardstick for IOUs. A coin, or a dollar bill, is just a physical token representing a debt, a promise. Money is born from these promises, which are usually backed by some political authority like a king or a state, not from a lump of gold.
There's a fantastic historical example of this, isn't there? Charlemagne's system.
Absolutely. The system of pounds, shillings, and pence. People use that system to keep their accounts for, 800 years?
A ridiculously long time. And the craziest part is that for much of that period, many of the actual coins, they just didn't exist. They'd vanished or were never even minted.
Right. And people in, say, the 16th century openly called it imaginary money. The idea of the pound was what mattered for accounting, not whether you had a physical pound coin in your hand. The unit of account was more real than the currency.
They tracked it on things like tally sticks, right? These notched pieces of wood.
Exactly, which were basically unbreakable IOUs. It shows you the promise, the debt, is the real foundation.
So let's bring that to the modern world. How does this idea of money as debt define our system now. I'm thinking of the Bank of England.
A perfect example. So in 1694, the king needed money for a war. A group of bankers gave him a loan of 1.2 million pounds, a huge sum.
And in return?
In return, they got a monopoly on issuing banknotes. They were essentially given the right to print IOUs backed by the king's debt to them. The money they created was the debt.
And here's the part that just blows my mind. That original loan, it has never been paid back.
It can't be.
It's not that they don't want to, it's that it's structurally impossible. Why? Why does the system depend on that debt being permanent?
Well, this gets to the heart of what modern money is. If the state were to actually repay that founding debt, the Bank of England would have to call in all its assets. The money supply, which is based on that debt, would just vanish.
The whole system would collapse.
The whole system collapses. The money we use every day only functions as long as that foundational government debt is permanent. It proves that modern currency comes from state-backed IOUs that are never, ever meant to be settled.
Okay, so if our entire monetary system is built on this kind of technical, permanent debt, it makes the way we feel about personal debt even stranger.
The moral confusion is profound.
It really is. Because on one hand, we all believe paying back money is, a core moral duty. But on the other hand, for most of history, we've seen anyone who lends money for a living as, well, basically evil.
That tension is ancient.
Yeah.
If you go back to the earliest Vedic poems in India, around 1500 BC, the Sanskrit word grina meant both debt and sin, or guilt.
So the two concepts were literally the same word.
The very same word. And it wasn't just about money. The concept was broadened to mean all your responsibilities in life. You had a debt to the gods, a debt to your ancestors, a debt to all of humanity. Just being alive meant you were in a state of existential debt.
That is such a powerful idea, and it seems incredibly dangerous if it gets into the wrong hands.
It is. Because this moral language of debt is the perfect tool for reframing violence as a moral obligation.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, if you're a powerful, violent person, a warlord, a mafioso, a conquering general, you can take things from people by force. But it's much more effective to turn around and tell your victims that they now owe you something.
You've reframed extortion as a financial transaction.
Precisely. And we see states do this all the time. Look at what France did in Madagascar in 1895. They invade, they pacify the population, which means killing a lot of people. And then what does the French general do?
He sends them a bill.
He imposes heavy taxes. And the official justification was that the Malagasy people had to, and I'm quoting here, reimburse the costs of having been invaded.
That's breathtaking.
They had to pay for the bullets used to shoot them, and they had to pay for the colonial infrastructure, the railroads, the plantations, that they never asked for, and that was built for French profit. They were told they owed France.
And this forces them into the new colonial economy, right?
Yeah.
They have to work in the mines or on plantations to earn the French currency to pay the French tax.
It's the monetization of their own subjugation. It's brilliant and it's horrifying.
And this idea of power and obligation, it even gets baked into our legal system. You draw a line from ancient Rome and the concept of property.
A very direct line. The Latin word for private property was dominium,
Which comes from dominus.
master, as in a slave owner. The ultimate model for property in Roman law was the master's absolute, unquestionable power over his household, which included his slaves. A slave was legally a thing. You could do whatever you wanted with them.
And that concept of absolute ownership over a thing.
It became the foundation of Western legal ideas about private property. Our whole notion of individual rights over our possessions has its roots in this very violent hierarchical model of the master's power over the slave.
So if debt is this engine of hierarchy and often violence, what happens when it just goes too far? When the system creates so much debt that society itself starts to break down?
Well, ancient societies had a solution for that, a really radical one, at least from our modern perspective.
You're talking about the clean slates, the debt jubilees.
Exactly. In ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylon, they recognized that debt could spiral out of control. You'd have famines, harvests would fail, and huge numbers of peasants would fall into what's called debt peonage.
Can you explain what that was? How did it work?
Sure. A peasant farmer has a bad year, so he borrows grain from a local temple or a wealthy landowner. The interest is sky high. When he can't pay it back, he has to pledge his land, or his labor, or even his family's labor to the creditor.
And they become essentially hereditary debt slaves.
Right. And this was a massive problem for the king. He needed free peasants to farm the land, pay taxes, and most importantly, serve in his army. A kingdom of debt slaves is a weak kingdom.
So what did the kings do?
They would periodically declare a clean slate. One of the first we know of was Uranimagina in Sumer, around 2350 BC. These weren't suggestions. They were royal decrees that just canceled everything.
Everything.
Well, all the consumer debt. Commercial loans between merchants were usually exempt, but all the small-scale debts that were forcing people into servitude wiped out, land was returned, and debt peons were set free.
The creditors, the local elite, must have been furious. How did the kings get away with what was basically a massive seizure of their wealth?
It was a very clever political move. A new king would often declare a jubilee right when he took the throne. It was a way to establish his legitimacy, to show he was a king of justice who protected the poor. And ultimately, social stability and a functioning army were more important to him than the balance sheets of a few rich landowners.
He was choosing the survival of the society over the sanctity of debt contracts.
Which is the exact opposite of our modern approach.
It really is. I mean, think about the 2008 financial crisis. The banks and the big creditors were bailed out because they were too big to fail.
But not the homeowners, not the small-scale debtors.
No. In fact, things got worse for them. There was this huge backlash where the power of creditors was actually strengthened. In places like Minnesota, the number of arrest warrants for people who missed court dates over unpaid debts, it jumped 60%.
They started jailing people for civil debts again.
They were doing the very thing those Mesopotamian kings were trying to prevent 4,000 years ago.
It just shows how uniquely creditor-focused our era is. We've elevated the principle of you must repay above almost everything else, including sometimes the basic well-being of society. #outro. So when we pull it all together, this deep dive shows us that the neat little story of money, beginning with barter, it's just not the case. The real history of money is the history of credit, of debt, and of the state power and violence that's always been used to enforce it.
And that brings us back to the original idea of a promise. You argue that debt is just the perversion of a promise. It's a human relationship that's been corrupted by math and the threat of force.
Exactly. When the French sent Madagascar a bill for their own invasion, that wasn't a promise. It was coercion.
So if true freedom is really about our ability to make real promises to one another, promises based on trust and mutual support, not violence, then maybe the first step toward a different kind of world is to ask a very simple question. What do we truly owe, and to whom?